I'm your host, X-odus, and today we're joined by Matt Hughson. He is a game developer and programmer with over 15 years of experience in the video game industry. He works across all major gaming platforms with some of the juggernauts in the industry, such as Activision's Radical Entertainment on the games Prototype 1 and 2, Techland's survival horror game Dying Light, Xbox Game Studios' The Coalition for Gears of War 4 and 5, and he also helped with the development of the online multiplayer lobby system at Electronic Arts. On his free time, he's also an indie developer making his own retro games for the Nintendo Entertainment System. Some of his games are From Below, Witch and Whiz, Minecart Madness, and upcoming titles like Super Sunny World for the NES and the port of his game From Below for the Gameboy handheld system. Matt Hughson, welcome to X-odus Retro Nation.
Hey, thanks for having me. So happy to be here.
Your first game was Rock, Paper, Scissors, I believe. Was that like in school, high school, college, or how was that?
Yeah, that was at university. My first time actually programming a game, and it was also like my first time programming really at university. Okay. I hadn't programmed prior to going to school.
Now, one thing I should have mentioned on the intro: your Homebrew magazine. You have an online magazine for homebrew games. You also had I forgot the name, that YouTube
Summer Showcase, Homebrew Summer Showcase.
I was gonna call it a video catalog, but yeah, Showcase. Yeah, that was quite a big number of titles, homebrew titles.
Yeah, 140 games.
That's right. And how many consoles?
I think it was 17 consoles.
Something like that. It was a number that I was like, what? Like, wow,
that's wild.
Okay, perfect. Little bit of explanation for some of the people who may not be familiar with the lingo. Homebrew games, the term homebrew obviously refers to like private people doing artisan drinks like craft beers and like coffees, I believe, any alcoholic drinks. So in the term of video games, homebrew means something that hobbyist or an indie developer like yourself produce a game or make a game, whether it's like on a small amount or mass produce for a defunct or out of production platform. So just clearing that out for people, because they're gonna be hearing this homebrew term a lot. So From Below is a puzzle game for the NES that has the perfect mix between traditional Tetris gameplay and modern updated rotation mechanics with a little twist or gimmick, the legendary Kraken, right? Coming from below, messing with your gameplay, pushing blocks out of place, pushing them up actually. So you created this game in 3 months, starting May 2020, right? Finish
sounds about right, yeah.
August, I believe. And you had, again, by the time I find out about you, you had a limited physical release of 100 units. However, you did a first wave on November 9th for the first 50. And that's one of the ones that I was able to acquire back then from the original first wave.
Glad it arrived safely. That was
definitely
worrying for me.
And then the second wave was October 28, 2021, a year later. The first wave pretty much got sold out in 20 minutes, I believe.
Something like that, yeah.
And then the last, not this one, this was first, but the second wave was 10 minutes, right?
Yeah, sounds about right.
It's a great, it's such a, I believe, doesn't get any more flattering than that, right?
Definitely. Yeah, it's flattering for sure. Also, like there's a lot of, especially for my first game, I have no idea what to expect. So trying to figure out the right number to get so that I'm not sitting on copies of this for the rest of my life. So kind of just having it out the door and knowing that, okay, I can get rid of these, not get rid of, but you know what I mean? Like I can sell these 100 copies and not have to worry about it over a long period is very kind of Yeah, it releases a lot of stress.
For people to understand too, that was a limited physical release. You
Yes.
actually released the digital ROM is available currently, but and correct me if I'm wrong, but your From Below, the ROM is actually free.
Yep.
Right. The
Yeah, I can
final
kind of
build.
yeah, I can explain like why. It's kind of a long-winded
That,
development. So
that is one of
basically,
my questions. So yeah, let's jump on that.
yeah, so basically I started learning NES development like basically May back in 2020. And to learn it, I basically made a game as I went, like adding more features as I learned new things, and that game became From Below. In the process, I was like really happy with how it was turning out. It was much originally I was thinking it was maybe just something I would keep to myself, or I might release it, but without much fanfare. But as it progressed, I thought it was getting good enough to invest a bit more time into it. So I got an artist, Haller Zoltan, and a musician, Twee, who's done a ton of NES homebrew since then, to do kind of professional art and music. But when we did it, it was meant to just be a free project. I was just kind of trying to get something out the door to get experience with the NES. But then after I finished,
right?
Yeah, after I finished it, I got a lot of people saying they wanted a physical copy. And so I had to kind of go back to those guys and say, like, hey, I know like you agreed to they worked on it for free. I had to go back to them and say, hey, like, I know we kind of worked on this for free and you were donating your time, but do you mind if I sell it? And so the 100 copies was kind of an initial foot in the door, just so, I don't know, just to keep things simple. And then afterwards, getting permission to do more later on from those guys. But yeah, so it started off just intending to be a digital only free game, and just based on demand.
It actually makes sense, because if you kept selling that online up to today, like I can see how the people who work for free will be like, hey, Matt, you're making money out of this. I get
Right.
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And they're actually cool with it. Like, just to be clear, in the end, I talked to them all, and nobody really cares. But yeah, I think it's definitely like a little awkward. But luckily, like, I've worked with those guys since then. Both of them worked on Witch and Wiz as well. So
is it in the cars to have another physical release for From Below on the NES, or
yeah, so my plan, I haven't like really officially said this, but I've kind of hinted at it a bunch. The plan is that when I release From Below Pocket for the Game Boy probably in September, I'm going to re-release the NES version as well at the same time.
So you're saying I'm getting an exclusive? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I don't know, it's less exclusive now, but it won't be like the numbered limited edition. I think I'll still do the yellow cartridges because I kind of feel like it's part of the identity of the game, but yeah, they won't be the hand numbered cartridges like you have. What number do you have, by the way?
I'm trying to remember, because I saw the name on the
spine on the side.
42.
Good
number 42. So it was one of the last ones, I believe, of the
first batch. Yeah,
that's right.
Those are hand numbered by my wife, by the way.
I was going to say, I thought it was your handwriting. Okay.
No, if I did it, yeah, people would be sending them back, I think.
What was that? What was it, 12? Okay, as for the gameplay, again, so we're talking about the From Below. You have three styles on the NES: the Kraken battle mode, which, like we discussed, the Kraken comes and start messing with your gameplay. Classic mode, which basically is the Kraken turned off, and just playing standard Tetris. However, this is still a fresh take on it, at least on the NES, because you get to play a modern feel of Tetris. And if you don't want to mess with the Kraken gimmick, which is actually cool, because I was playing it. You have a great game when you go like, I'm gonna test it. I'm gonna do a 5-minute run, and 45 minutes later you're like, okay, that was hard to put down. That's what happened with your game, and I still do that from time to time. Like I play it. Let's see how high I can get. The third style is the turn-based Kraken battle, which I believe you can trigger when you hit select, right? Because otherwise it's like every
every time a piece lands, it
Oh, every
runs
time a
this.
piece lands, that's how it is. Okay. Okay.
And then
So
the other,
otherwise, it's like every 10 seconds, right? When you have the standard
yeah.
way.
But
Okay.
both of them, you can manually raise it with the select button. Because sometimes you get in situations where you want it to move up to fill the space or something like that. So I put that in for that.
Your game had outstanding reviews. You had people, for example, Indie Gamer Chick said, outside of Tetris 99, a game of Tetris has never been more intense. From below is the best thing to happen to Tetris since Tetris 99. And then you have Callum Fraser from alphabetagamer.com, a Tetris game that's actually superior to the classic NES version. What is your take on reviews of that? When you're compared to, Tetris,
I like those. Yeah, I like them. Yeah, I mean, so when the game, so I'm not like really a Tetris guy at all.
That's what
I'm probably as familiar with it as like your average person. I've of course played it here and there, but never like very into it. Wasn't into the competitive scene at all. So I basically made, as I said, like the original project wasn't really meant to be a commercial product. It was just learning how to make games for the NES. So it was very basic, like how I remembered Tetris being, and I didn't understand any of the subtleties or anything like that. And near the end, when I was basically ready to finish it, I started a beta test. And in the process, some of the classic Tetris players got in the beta and they started giving me all this feedback about like how it's actually supposed to play, like what are the actual rules and what's important, what's not. And the game like completely transformed after that. Prior to that, it was like nothing of note at all in terms of like that style of gameplay. But afterwards, yeah, basically added like wall kicks, just like everything from a modern puzzle game like this.
I remember those posts on Twitter when you were tweaking the gameplay. Probably wall kicks was one of the last things, if I remember correctly, right?
I don't remember. It's all a bit of a blur because it was a pretty short period. Like the whole game was only a few months, but that period where I was adding all those additional things was just a couple of weeks, really. But yeah, it was like wall kicks, T-spins, lock delay. And I think I had lock delay in, but I didn't really understand how it was supposed to work. And I had made it like in a really kind of awkward way where it would delay for too long. Anyway, it's kind of like very subtle nuance. And things like I didn't realize like classic Tetris players often start from level 18 or 19 because it's like the way the scoring works. It's often better to start as high as possible. But they also use Game Genie codes or hacks to start at level 29 as well, which is kind of the last level before things kind of top out. But so anyway, I added all those into the game as a result of that stuff that I just never, I can't even play on those levels. Like I'm a pretty basic player. So it was awesome to have all those guys giving me feedback and sending me footage at really high level play, things that I can't do on my own. It's weird to work on a game where there's whole areas of it that I can't even reach. Like I can hack it to like start on say level 40, but I can't actually survive that long. So I have to like either slow down the game or cheat or something. So
is that the reason why you have like those hidden secrets of how to start from level 19 or level?
Exactly. Yeah, it's from those guys telling me that like that's actually a core part of the experience. Is that's a level 18 start or a level 19 start is a common way to go for high scores.
How well, I guess you already mentioned that, like how the idea or from Blown came to be. You already talked about learning to make your first NES game and picking something like, hey, let's do Tetris. But how do you come up with the name title? Like why? I mean, I understand why, but how do you arrive to that?
I actually don't remember. It was originally called What's Kraken, which
What's
is
Kraken? Oh man, I love that.
Yeah. But I think people complained about it or something. Something made me think like I can't live with this name forever. Yeah, I don't remember where I came from. I like short kind of like the game you mentioned before, Swipe Tap Smash, Dash Maximus. I like those kind of short.
It has a rhythm to it. I like the name on that one too. When I
Yeah, I
found
like
that
the
one,
kind of
yeah, it has same like From Below, it just sticks out.
short, punchy names. I mean, it was based on like a creature like rising from the deep.
So you early on, you knew, I guess, I want to have the Kraken just messing with the gameplay or something messing with the gameplay, I guess.
I think, yeah, if I remember correctly, basically I started with the basic Tetris formula, and then I went and found some free art for it, and the art was themed around like a medieval oceanside castle or something like that. And I think that's where the inspiration came from. So just looking at it, kind of came up with the idea. I was looking for a twist on the mechanic. I didn't end up using that art in the end. I replaced it with all the stuff from Haller Zoltan. But yeah, I think that's all it was. I knew I wanted like something, a twist on it, so it wasn't just exactly what I had before or what was in Tetris. And I think I wanted like blocks, garbage blocks, something along those lines. And just, I don't know, no grand source of inspiration, just a simple idea.
It was a clever idea. I love the name. I love the concept. That being transferred to From Below Pocket. I love how the cover has that. Essentially, you're mimicking the same thing, but you have that chibi version of it.
Yeah,
It is perfect. It's what the Game Boy is all about. It's like your NES on the go, like on a mini, more secluded.
Yeah, I was that one. I was inspired by Puzzle Fighter, the Street Fighter puzzle game.
One of my favorite.
They do like the chibi versions of all the fighters. That was basically, I was stealing that idea.
What made you want to code for a game like From Below? Well, From Below, but what made you want to pick the Game Boy? I understand why you picked the NES. There's such a big thing, a big community now on NES homebrews, but what made you want to code specifically like on the Game Boy?
Right. Probably a couple factors. I mean, one, I did have a Game Boy as a kid. I wasn't a huge fan. Like, I don't know if you had if Game Boy was part of your childhood at all, but
big time.
Yeah. So for me, I had a Game Boy as a kid, but it was always kind of like second fiddle to the NES. It was never something I loved. It was like something I would settle for if I was like in the car.
You had,
yeah, I wouldn't like sit in my room and play it if I could watch TV or something like that. And the games were pretty like subpar. Not all of them, of course. Like the NES had terrible games as well, but I guess just the ones I happened to own were not very good. I never owned any of the big ones for some reason. Never had Pokemon or Super Mario Land 2, Wario Land. I never had any of those. I had these random like licensed games. Spider-Man 3 I bought. I absolutely hated it. But anyway, so it didn't have like a super nostalgic place for me, but I definitely remember playing it, and I had one. And so it's definitely like part of my life, but not a huge part, but more so than say like a Game Gear or something like that.
Okay.
And then I think the second aspect of it that drew me to it was so From Below for the NES is written in C for the most part instead of assembly. And there's a C library for Game Boy. So essentially all the core gameplay code is identical between the two versions. So I was able to like, and this is kind of what attracted me from a technology standpoint, is I could take the code I already wrote and essentially just rejig it to work on the Game Boy. I had to rewrite like the rendering and obviously input slightly different maybe. The screen resolution is the big change.
That was one of my questions up ahead. I'm glad you mentioned it's fitting perfectly organically. That's porting, because you didn't create a game from scratch. I mean, you did, but what I'm saying is you didn't create a concept from scratch. You had, this is, what a lot of them did. Double Dragon, let's make it for the Game Boy. Mario, let's make it for the Game Boy, and Contra, so on. So that's, in this case, it's the same thing, just like you said, smaller. So that's porting your game, in your particular experience on the Game Boy. Is it as easy as it sounds? Like, is it an importing process, or do you have to code everything from scratch?
No, yeah. So it was probably more work than the original NES version in the end. But like, it didn't have to be. I could have probably, it's definitely not just drag and drop. Like there's going to be some work no matter what, because especially because of the resolution, there's just no way to really get around that. Like going from basically double the resolution down to the Game Boy, it's kind of like you have to make some changes. It just won't work, most likely, for most games. And then on top of that, of course, the color restrictions are totally different, and going from color to black and white, but then also to Game Boy Color, which has different color restrictions than the NES. They're similar, but not the same. So that adds some work. So if I had just done the DMG, the black and white version, maybe that would have been simpler. But a lot of the work came from adding multiplayer. That was a massive time sink, because the NES version didn't have multiplayer at all. So that whole mode didn't exist. There was no competitive mode. So that had to be designed and then implemented. And then on top of that, it uses the Game Boy Link cable, which is not the simplest thing to implement. Yeah, there's a lot of issues I know with trying to get that working. And then, yeah, that's where I spent most of the time. I also spent a bunch of time getting Super Game Boy support working. That was simpler overall. It was mostly adding the border, and then the coloring for Super Game Boy is like a totally separate thing from Game Boy Color and from the DMG. It's more like a semi-transparent filter you add on top of the game, which is why it works so well for static screens. But if you start moving, you can imagine like the game moving under a film. Yeah, like if you look at Donkey Kong 94, the Donkey Kong for Game Boy, like the level select screen looks amazing. It's like it looks better than an NES game because it's static and they can color it perfectly. But then when you play the actual gameplay, which has scrolling,
motion blur,
well, it just, the colors, like they have to be much more reserved on how they use color. But anyway, yeah, so spent a bunch of time on there, and having the game work on both the black and white and the Game Boy Color version added a bunch of effort as well. So yeah, in the end, it was probably more work than the NES version, even though the core gameplay was already done. And the resolution stuff, like, I don't know if you noticed, but the original Game Boy Tetris, the height of the level is actually smaller than the standard Tetris. Like Tetris is supposed to be 10 wide, 20 high. But Game Boy Tetris, I think, is only 18 high.
I saw that on your Discord and actually wanted to talk about that. So I'm glad you brought it up. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so basically From Below Pocket is the full 20 by 10 game, which I think is the first time it's been done on the Game Boy. And the way I do that is I essentially skip rendering every 8th line. So usually every tile on a Game Boy game is 8 pixels by 8 pixels. But in From Below Pocket, they're 8 pixels wide, but only 7 pixels high. And so over the length of the screen, you end up getting enough space for the extra rows and then some. But it ends up that your tiles aren't square anymore, which some people complain about. But I think the being able to like deliver that classic gameplay that people expect is more important than it being proportional.
Of course. And to be honest with you, that's not something I noticed. And I guess it can be noticeable once you're aware of it, because I saw that picture on Discord, and when you look for it, then it makes sense. You're like, okay, I see it. But before that, at least personally, I didn't even realize. And that is such a huge, that's coding better than the original game. I don't know if you can call it better, but like accomplishing something that they could have done, and whether it was a choice or they just didn't have the time to think outside the box, which you clearly did. That is,
or they just like that's kind of like similar to the stuff when I was making the NES version, where I think if I wasn't as kind of in tune with the community that I am now, like I wouldn't have assumed it matters either. I would have been like, who cares? Like 18 high is almost 20 high. It doesn't matter. So I'm sure the devs were in similar situation where like, does it matter? Is it worth spending time, or should we just get it out? So yeah, I think I have the perspective of like 30 years of people playing these games.
Now, speaking of you programming for peripherals, right? like Super Game Boy, making it compatible at least for the Super Nintendo peripheral, Super Game Boy, and the link cable for multiplayer. So next question is fitting for that. It was ahead, but we're gonna take it right now. Could it be possible in the future? And I understand that the programming part might be too hard for something maybe now obscure in the way of programming at least, but not coding or programming, but could you design possibly for the NES a game that really takes full advantage of the criminally underused, ROV or the Power Glove, which having one or two games of a whole library devoted to just those two pieces of tech, which I understand they were kind of clunky back then. But if you think about it, if you look at the Wii U, Switch even, they were ahead. They were so far ahead, even knowing it kind of flunk in a way. But looking back, those were interesting pieces of technology back then.
Yeah. Game Boy's similar. Like there's so many peripherals and NES as well that kind of never really took off. That probably have room for, I don't know, exploring design. I know that for the NES, there's at least one Rob game. I think one of the what are they called? The
you have the stacker and you had the gyro.
Yeah, but for homebrew, I mean, there's a
I'm sorry.
8-bit Xmas game that uses it, I believe.
Oh, really? I have not heard of that. I'm a huge fan of Rob, so okay.
I think it's like just if I haven't actually seen it, but I'm just remembering from hearing people talk about it. I think basically you can set up like an array of them in a flash to like Christmas music or something like that. I don't think it's much of a game. I think it's more like a
gimmick,
screensaver, a very expensive screensaver.
Right.
But yeah, I think there's no reason why people can't make games for that stuff. There was the Tailgate Party, which was a cornhole game that used the running mat, a homebrew game. So you threw beanbags onto it and it would register like where it landed, stuff like that. I feel like the biggest one though is the Zapper. I'd love to make a Zapper game because that's one that people actually have. The thing is, if I spend 6 months of my life working on a Rob game so that like 2 people can play it, it's not really a great investment.
Such a niche. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, and it's not something like that is, you really need the device, right? You can't really emulate the Rob experience or the Power Glove experience. Those are really all about the physicality of it. Zapper you can kind of emulate with a mouse, but
that's true.
Yeah, so I'd love to do a Zapper game at some point. I always thought it'd be cool to do like a House of the Dead kind of game with big full
fan
screen.
Of those.
Yeah, big full screen characters and like shooting off parts of their body and just refreshing the screen. But I don't know, something down the road maybe.
Something down the road, that'll be great. Has developing games for the NES and Game Boy impacted or changed your approach in regards of modern game development now?
It's a good question. I find like day to day, the biggest thing is like it gives me an outlet that I don't have in my day job, which is like at work, we're working on massive projects with hundreds of people, and the smallest change can ripple through the whole project. And it's quite nerve-wracking at times to like make big changes because you're worried, well, what kind of impact is this going to have? Who do I need to talk to get approval? Which designs? There's like 5 designers that will care about this, that kind of thing. Whereas working on these smaller projects, I get to kind of do it all and I don't have to ask permission. I can hack things in. I can rewrite entire subsystems in an evening just on a whim. I don't need any approval. I can be the tech director, the art director, game designer, music director, all myself. So I feel like the main thing for me is I get an outlet, which makes my day job easier in a way because I don't feel the need as much to do all those things. I kind of have that outlet. So that's the biggest thing. But I find my work experience, my professional experience has a lot of impact on my homebrew experience because I know how to, like over the years, I've learned how to actually ship a project and how to work with people and how to schedule and how to like know the right order to do things and kind of just be professional in a kind of hobbyist area has helped a lot. I've been able to work with a lot of people and manage my time. I know how long it's going to take to work on something. I know when I'm just kind of tired. It's important thing is I find is to recognize like when a project is just like you're just not going to finish it versus I just need to get over a hump and I'll be back into it in a week or two. So I can kind of recognize the difference between the two. Stuff like that. I don't know.
Okay. What was your biggest problem to overcome while creating From Below for the NES? And at the same time, what was your biggest obstacle you faced during the porting for the Game Boy Pocket, for the Game Boy From Below Pocket version?
For the NES version, there wasn't any huge like things that stand out, but there was a constant. It was just learning new stuff every day because I was learning the whole platform from scratch. Even just knowing how to like build, like compile a ROM, like I had no idea. I was starting from scratch, so it was just a constant learning experience, I would say, on that one, as opposed to like a big roadblock along the way. Overall, it wasn't actually super challenging. It was challenging, but it wasn't like beat my head against the wall kind of difficult. It was just really fun. A little beyond my comfort zone, and in an area I was super passionate about. So it was basically just fun, start to finish. For the Game Boy port, it was definitely the multiplayer was like very challenging for me. Mostly because it was a bit of a black box. I still don't completely understand how it works, like how the networking layer works between the two systems. So there was a lot of like just random bugs that seemed like classic programmer, but they shouldn't be possible. Like this should work fine. So I ended up just having to add like a lot of redundancy and edge case handling and stuff like that. It was just kind of like, I think I have it all working, and then I'd play for an hour and I'd get one random, like really rare bug. Okay, I gotta handle that case now. And then I think I'd have that finally solved, and I'd do a bunch more play testing and find one more like really minor thing. And it just kept going on and on forever.
Yeah, I think I one of a podcast when I was doing my research, you were talking about how if it would have come out one every 1,000 sessions, like it's not a big deal, but it was once every single session. Like
Yeah.
you couldn't live with that, I believe. It's
Right. Yes.
basically what you convey there. During an interview for Limited Run, they titled the interview "Making a NES Game in 2021." You talked about the NES game influences for Witch and Whiz. However, I need to ask you, as a game developer, which games would you say were instrumental or had an influence in you for overall growing up? You don't have to limit them to NES games, actually, because I know you had access to multiple consoles.
Yeah. I mean, for sure, I would say the biggest influence on me is Super Mario Brothers. By far, kind of my most loved series as a kid. In particular, probably Super Mario Brothers 2 and maybe Super Mario Brothers 3. I think over time, Super Mario Brothers 3 has become more of a favorite, but as a kid too, we played a lot. Contra was a big one. Playing that co-op was it wasn't influential in the way that like I would say like, oh, I always wanted to like take that idea and do something with it. It was just influential in the sense that like I played it a lot, and I don't know, it kind of like it was a big part of my life for a long time. Yeah, those were two of the big ones. I don't know. I kind of like, I just played stuff like throughout my life. I don't know. Like I just kind of moved with like Link to the Past was big for me on Super Nintendo. GoldenEye for sure on N64. That was like absolutely massive for me and my friends. We'd play it every night. And then like around GameCube era, I moved to university and things kind of slow down and that kind of thing. But yeah, those were always like a big Nintendo guy up until probably GameCube. Those kind of killed it.
That's
GameCube.
what happened to me. Towards the
GameCube, I
started to drift away. Like I was still aware, but I didn't actually own a GameCube until think during the PlayStation 2 era, probably.
Right. Well, I think it was PlayStation 2 era.
Was it? Okay, then.
Yeah, because it would have been.
It might have been PlayStation 3, because I remember this was a gift. Well, that makes sense, because my friend got a PlayStation 3, so he gifted me his PS2 and his GameCube. That makes sense, yes.
Right. Yeah, so I was still pretty hardcore Nintendo fan during GameCube, but it definitely got tougher. It was like you were kind of like, yeah, it was harder to defend. That if that was the one console you had, like my friends were playing Metal Gear 2 and all this stuff. So, and then yeah, Xbox 360, I would say, finally kind of jumped ship. But yeah, those, I don't know. I don't have like a huge, there's no game that like really stuck with me, like that I was always pursuing in some way. Like I would say Mario Brothers is the closest to that. Like I really want to make platformers. I really like making platformers.
You're already dipping your toes in that particular formula.
Yeah, already. Yeah. So that's kind of like where I always wanted to get with NES development, was making platformers. So From Below and Witch and Whiz were always in my head as kind of stepping stones. They had different technological advances that would kind of help me reach that. From Below being like the most basic NES game, single screen, NROM, like 40 kilobytes. It's basically as simple as it can get. And then Witch and Whiz adds a little bit of scrolling, but not a side scroller. A memory mapper, MMC1, so I can do more graphical things as well as like some visual effects, stuff like that. And then Super Sunny World is kind of where I eventually wanted to land, which is MMC3, full scrolling levels, action, gameplay, the stuff I really passionate about.
Actually, I had a personal question about your upcoming game, Super Sunny World.
Mm-hmm.
For what I've seen and footage, right? And I'm not sure if I'm looking at test runs or if I'm looking at the actual final product, which I believe I am. But are you mimicking the level design of Super Mario 1, or in some cases 3, or that was just kind of like test runs?
Yeah, exactly. I use so the shipping game will not have any of that stuff.
Okay.
But the idea is I use it as a litmus test. So it's like a familiar, you don't want too many variables, right? When you're trying to kind of create something. So I recreate some levels that I'm super familiar with, that everyone is, like 1-1 in Mario 1 and 1-1 in Mario 3, probably played them a million times. So by doing that and then putting my gameplay layered on top of it, I can kind of see how it feels.
Exactly.
Like there's things that come out too, like obvious ones, which are, oh, my jump height doesn't allow me to actually get over a pipe in Mario 1. And that might be okay because my game doesn't have to have pipes that big. But then it brings up questions like, why are the pipes that big? Or why does Mario need to jump that high? And then something you'll realize very quickly is that if he doesn't jump that high, then your platforms won't be big enough for him to fit under when he's big. So it really limits your game design choices because he can't jump up high enough to go under the same platforms that he jumps onto. Anyway, so things like that, it surfaces issues like that. It also it gives me something simple to work off for enemy placement and things like that. I can kind of get a sense of performance as well. Like if I have the same number of enemies that they had in Super Mario Brothers 1, does the game lag in ways that the original game didn't? And if it does, is that okay? Am I okay having less enemies? Stuff like that. But yeah, it's really just a test bed that eventually I'll throw out in favor of.
And I figured that's what it was. I mean, you mimicking, I don't want to call it mimicking, but you achieving the level of polish or how exact do you have to be when it comes to that platforming? I mean, it looks amazing, but at the same time, I was concerned, like, are you reskinning Mario 3? What are you doing? Like, is that what we're going to get? Which is not bad. I still would have gotten it, but I was just confused. I'm like, okay, are all the stages like that?
No, not at all.
To see your footage of that chain reaction, I believe it's on the first or third world, might be the first, on from Mario 3, which you try to mimic that chain reaction that goes with the Koopa shells that activates so you can jump on the platform to the sky bonus stage. And just to see that with your own sprites, that's when you feel like, I don't know if that was to you or it was early on, but to me, that's when you feel like you arrived. You know what I mean? That you were able to you can actually see it,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, like I get, yeah, I know it's kind of confusing for people. I get like what you're saying from people a lot, who are like, why are you remaking this game? Like you can just play Mario 3. So my intention is definitely not to recreate the game. I really like think of it as the game I'm envisioning is something like Mario, like a real sequel to Mario. So if Super Mario Brothers 2 wasn't like Doki Doki Panic, and it wasn't Super Mario Brothers USA like it was, or Super Mario Lost Levels.
A spiritual successor, let's say.
Yeah, like an actual middle ground between Mario 1 and Mario 3, where, because I think a lot of people, especially people who aren't in like hardcore retro gamers, their memory of Super Mario Brothers 1 is probably not super accurate. They probably remember like how Super Mario Brothers 3 and Super Mario Brothers World, Super Mario World felt, but they're picturing like that's how Super Mario 1 felt, but it wasn't at all. It's like it's very heavy. There's tons of momentum, which people love. I don't though. I really like Super Mario Brothers 3, but I love the simplicity of Super Mario Brothers 1. I love like the way the game design ecosystem of that game plays together. Like there's a very limited palette of objects that make up a game that feels extremely varied from start to finish. Like it feels like a much bigger game than it actually is. It's only a 40 kilobyte game, but they pack so much stuff into it by creating archetypes that play well off each other. Things like just the fact that you can break bricks, and that those are also the platforms you need to traverse across. It creates this interesting dichotomy, or this relationship between the two, where like you have to make a choice of, do I see if there's something hidden in that brick and potentially lose my ability to jump up to the next like layer of these bricks, or do I just like search the top first? And or if I come into a level with like 4-1 where there's like on screen 50 different bricks, do I break every single one searching for something and potentially run out of time, or do I do it once, sacrifice a life, and then forever I know exactly where the coin cache is hidden? Stuff like, I don't know, it's really simple things like that that interest me, and that I feel like games that mimic Super Mario Brothers 1 get wrong. They miss these little details that seem insignificant, but when you add them all up, it really, like, you need all of them to feel like something special. So anyway, very long-winded way of saying I kind of want to take all those things I love about Mario 1, add a layer of like what I think is improved control and mechanics, and also adding like some things from adding stuff on top. Like in Mario 1, you shells didn't break bricks, for instance. So adding that, or little twists like the equivalent of a mushroom in Super Mario Brothers 1. In my game, they don't move. They stay on top of the block. And the idea being that in my head, I think if you're like on your last, if you're small version, like it should be easy to get big again. And going from big to like fire flower equivalent should be harder. That's the one that should move, because
that makes sense. Like you have to chase
the power weapon. Yeah, exactly. So, which I haven't like fully gone through. I suspect there's a chance once I go through it all, I'll realize, oh, it's actually better the way it was before. But anyway, I want to do twists like that. So I'm not trying to recreate the game. I'm definitely not trying to recreate the momentum and movement of the Mario games. In my head, I'm trying to create it as I remember it. So like rose tinted glasses version of that style of game. And then of course, new levels, hopefully some new enemies, new bosses, stuff like that. So I think in the end, somebody who didn't see any of the development might not even put 2 and 2 together, that this is heavily inspired from Super Mario Brothers 1. That's kind of my goal.
Even better,
but
yeah.
when I put them side by side and show like the exact same level, it's obvious that like they're together.
So you were talking about Super Mario Bros. 1 engine. I completely relate to everything you were saying, because that is my favorite Mario Brothers experience. Maybe Super Mario World being, they always tie second place between 3 and Mario World to me, because you have which one, and you heard that debate before, which one's a better Mario game? I mean, Mario 3 has, obviously Mario World supposed to be better, but when you realize, when I saw a debate on a YouTube channel, Mario 3 has way more gameplay, meaning time. Like you have way more stages than Mario World, and I never realized that. And
I didn't know that either. Yeah, that's interesting.
For some, and it makes sense. I was like, so for some, that's superior, and I'm like, wow, that's a close call, you know. So Mario One, that's something. It always amazes me because the first level really shows you everything about the physics that you need to know from the jump. And Miyamoto, I believe, said that they wanted to do the whole Goomba approaching you, something that's killing you right away, then next to getting a power up, and then jumping your first pipe. That basically teaches you everything you need to know in the first minute.
Yeah.
You know, I mean minute,
Yeah.
if you're getting familiar with movement and all that, but in the first 30 seconds you need to know everything you need to know about the game. And you know, that's amazing game design. So actually for the Switch, my biggest I hate that they remove, and I understand that they had to, but the Mario 35 game, that was Mario 1 on crack. That was just,
I loved it.
I couldn't put it down. Like I'll be at work, going back to the days when you were in school and you couldn't wait to go home. I just couldn't put it down, you know, and that's a signature of a great engine, you know, like the mechanics and the physics of it, and they got it right on the first game, of course.
And obviously, like Mario Maker is like a testament to that as well, right?
That is my consolation, that now that there's no Mario 35, so I jump on some random levels on that and try to just satisfy my thirst for new gameplay with the same engine, and that's what I jump to now.
Yeah, that's like what you just said, like satisfying your thirst for that type of gameplay. Like that's how I feel as well. Like that's why I'm making Super Sunny World. It's because that's the game I want to play. Like I go out searching for Super Mario clones, quote unquote, and I just can't find them. Like everything I find, it's not quite right. And I don't want to like call out games or like talk down because I still haven't delivered. So I should be careful what I say. But yeah, like I go, I'm like, oh, this, like, yeah, I see what they're going. This is it. And then I download it. I'm like, this is not quite right. Like they're missing some of the key ingredients, and it doesn't work without it all. So I end up, yeah, I crave it as well. I want more.
That's what you have made me excited about Super Sonic World now, because that's probably gonna be my next I cannot put down type of game, you know.
I'm curious how you'll feel. Like you're the kind of person I'm really curious about what they'll think, because the movement is so much different from Super Mario Brothers 1. Okay. That if you go into it expecting that, I'm curious what you'll think. Like it's more like Super Mario World than anything. Okay. Movement. But maybe closer to Super Mario 3, but it's not exactly like any of them. Like the running doesn't make you jump higher, stuff like that.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And like the amount of and that's like, I think that's from having kids. Like I watch my kids play games like Super Mario Brothers 1, and it's so frustrating for them. Like they can, that kind of mechanic of like the faster I go, the higher I jump. It's just so like anti-child, which is funny because I played these as a kid, but for whatever reason, modern kids got soft and they can't play Mario Brothers. But so like that comes from that, where I want to make sure that anybody who can move the D-pad and press the A button should be able to finish every level. And yeah, and I only want like speed to be a finesse thing. I don't want it to be a requirement of the game. So yeah, so stuff like that. The momentum is much weaker. Like you can basically jump off a platform, go to the full apex of your jump, and get all the way back. Like you have a lot of air control. The sliding is there's a lot more ground friction compared to the original Mario Bros. So anyway, I like, not to talk you down or anything, but I'm a little worried that I've set the expectations wrong for some people. Like if you think Mario 1 is like the best, is better than Mario 3, you know, I'm curious what you'll think. You might still love it, but
I understand Mario 3 being superior, and I get that, but I personally prefer the Mario 1 engine, you know.
I love it too. Like it's not that I don't like it, it's that I think it's a way more difficult game. It's far less accessible for sure. It's a game that requires mastery in a way that I think the later games don't. The later games are like very pick up and play. you can feel like a master very quickly. And obviously, like Super Mario World, you see all the Kaizo runs and stuff. Like there's clearly another level that you can get to. But I think the average gamer can beat Super Mario World. But I know people who are pretty hardcore gamers who have never finished Super Mario Brothers 1. Like it is, World 8 is no joke. But I don't know. So I definitely lean towards, what's that?
I came from a home where my big brother, to me was like, am I able to finish Mario 1, you know? And to him was like, how many times can I finish Mario 1? Which to me was mind-boggling. I'm like, what are you doing? And he was like speeding through the levels. That was before speedrunning was a thing, you know? So I remember back then thinking like, what is this guy doing? You know, like just enjoy it. Like you're just going too fast. Like what are you and eventually, you know, that caught on. And from people like him, you find out that you cannot beat Mario 1, at least on the NES, for more than, what is that, 7 times in a row, and then it just freezes.
Oh, I didn't know that.
It's 7.
Okay.
7.
Yeah, some counter gets
7 times,
up.
9 times. Some. I want to say low number, but can you imagine beating it, say 7 to 9 times? But it's a certain amount of times that you can beat it in a row. And the very first seconds of the next 1-1 you're playing, it just freezes at a random place. But it's never longer than, you won't make it to the flower block on the first world after that set number. It just freezes.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I never heard that before. That's cool.
Yeah, it's a limitation. I guess they never expected people to go that crazy with that. But
oh yeah, of course. Or they figured it out and they were like, who cares? We gotta ship this.
What has been your personal crowning game development achievement so far?
For like homebrew stuff or for anything?
In general.
I'd say for homebrew, I mean, homebrew has been extremely kind of gratifying for me. Like every step of the way, I've really, really enjoyed it. For sure, like seeing From Below on a cartridge in my NES, like was like a dream come true. That was like a childhood fantasy come to life. I don't think I can really top that. And I think you'll hear that from a lot of homebrewers. Like it's like something maybe I'm not focused on in my whole life, but it's like it weaves its way all the way back to like 6-year-old me playing an NES for the first time and it being the greatest thing in the world. And like you were saying a minute ago about Mario online, like that feeling of just thinking about it all the time, being at school and talking about it, watching the cartoon after school, and like just thinking about the NES all the time. Like from that moment, there's like 30 plus years of life kind of intertwined there, and then eventually to have like this physical object that I created that has like all those memories and kind of knowledge and life choices leading to that is quite substantial for me. So that's obviously a big thing, and I don't know if I can top that, but getting Witch and Whiz on limited run games was pretty big for me. That was one, like I felt a sense of pride knowing that like the game I made was on, kind of went beyond just the homebrew world. It was something that was on like a retailer that I had known about prior to homebrew. So it was kind of went beyond that circle, and I felt
you're equivalent to see it at Toys R Us shelves, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe not quite that level. Maybe it is today.
In a way, I mean,
today's standards.
Did they give you numbers on how many units you sold or they sold?
Yeah, because I get paid per unit, but I can't.
Figure. How many units? Do you mind disclosing how many units you sold?
I can't say. It's like part of the contract.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Good. No, it's okay. But yeah, like I don't know if they would care, but I just don't want to mess with the relationship.
Of course.
But it was good. Like it was really like it did really well, way better than I thought it would. But yeah, not like that's awesome. I'm really happy with like the monetary side of it, but just the idea of like people I know who are just like maybe gamers, but not homebrew gamers or retro gamers might see that and like, I don't know, like it probably shouldn't matter, but it does for me. It's like a bit of cachet.
I get excited for you seeing that, honestly. I was
Thank
like,
you.
oh, limited runs. I was like, okay, like maybe this guy's getting too big to fit in my back pocket, you know?
No, not at all. Well, the thing is, like in that world, like my game is a very, very small fish in a big pond, right? Like when we were finalizing the date it would go on sale for limited run. They emailed me like a couple weeks before. I'm like, hey, I really think you should move it a week up. We can't really tell you why, but it's probably a good idea. I was like, okay, let's just do that. And then it turned out like the day I was going to release, they were also releasing like the first physical version of Knights of the Old Republic in like 20 years, like Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic on limited run the exact same day. It's like, okay, like
so they strategically moved their games. That makes sense.
Yeah. But I just mean
like they're
my
a well-oiled machine, honestly.
Yeah, and my point being though, like I'm sure in their eyes, like they're looking at Star Wars and some NES game is like, why are we even spending our time on this? But for me, like I'm happy to be there. So anyway.
Yeah, I think you're being modest. That's congrats on that.
I'm definitely not Star Wars.
I mean, you have talked about downloading emulation and even handle an emulation site in the past, younger years, of course. So my next question is, from a game developer's point of view, considering the cost of making a game and the financials involved publishing it, as you are now aware, also being your profession, in general, where do you stand in that regards of the subject, which is a touchy subject for some people, emulation, ROM hosting, downloading, and trading?
I don't have like a super strong stance on it, I guess. Like from a business standpoint, for me, the physical releases are much more lucrative than the digital, which seems counterintuitive. I think you would assume that digital is basically all profit, so you should make more on it. But the profit I make per copy on physical is more than digital, because I just can't, like, I would like to sell my games at $20 or $25 a piece digitally, but then you're like competing against like EA and stuff at that point, like, or Microsoft or whatever. Like it's hard to make that value proposition to someone, so I have to sell it for cheaper than I would like to in digital. But on physical, like, it's enough of a niche and a novelty that I can charge a bit more and kind of make some of my like time investment back. So I actually prefer doing the physical. That also could play into the fact that it was on limited run and there's millions of people that are interested in their stuff, even if they're not ever going to open it. So we'll see, like, as I do releases without them, and like maybe my attitude will change and I will only be selling a couple copies. But that's kind of how I feel right now. Like, morally, if that's what you mean, I don't know. I think like it's,
I mean, I'm a big emulation guy, and before I even went hardcore into collecting, my thing was having, as many ROMs I was able to, just like MP3 sharing back then. I was huge in that. I'm huge on the physical versions of it as well, ironically. But and I'm not demonizing. If anything, at some point I'll make a video defending it and having different, like a debate, like having people who like are against it, which I understand why, especially nowadays. And I get an in between now, but I understand both sides, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I'd say I'm kind of in between. I don't feel super strongly. Like, as you mentioned, I ran an emulation site when I was younger on GeoCities to kind of put a timestamp on that. So like, and it's also what kind of reinvigorated my love for the NES. I collected and stuff like that and kind of started from emulation. But like, I think if you ask me to write like a dissertation on like the moral like side of this, like, to me it's clearly like you're stealing. Like, I don't know, like, I think it's just like an accepted, like, I do it too. I'm not saying I don't. I'm just saying, like, I do it. But like, if you really asked me, if my kids asked me,
there are default consoles, you know what I mean? So like, we're downloading Switch ROMs.
Yeah, but like my feeling on that is like, maybe they're not releasing it right now, but like Shantae gets a re-release, and like,
True.
Are you still going to buy it if you had the ROM? Like, even though it wasn't being sold at the time, it may eventually, like, you never know what will happen with it. And I think it's very clear that you could make the argument, well, like, some of those games got big because of emulation, and suddenly people know about
Exactly.
gimmick and all these games, and
You
that's
get to
totally.
play
I
the
think
now
that's,
$600 games, you know?
yeah, I think that's a totally valid argument, but I think it's also valid for the person who created the game to say, well, I don't care. Like, I don't want you to play it for free. I want to
Especially
sell
the
it to you.
collections now. Like on Xbox 360, you can get collections.
Yeah. So I think like, but again, like I say all that with like zero conviction. I really don't care too much either way. Like, I think, yeah, I don't think it actually matters. I think is probably my feeling in the end. Like, I think it probably does more positive than negative, but I also think it's totally reasonable for somebody who created those games or owns the IP to say, I don't think it does have a net positive. So I would not, I'd prefer people didn't play it for free. So, but like, I don't know. I get my games pirated as well. I think it sucks. I think, yeah, I don't know. I really don't. It's hard with a topic like that because it's so hot button, and I don't actually care that I'm worried about like sticking my foot in my mouth over something like I don't feel super strong about. But like I loved like emulation in the like early like late 90s, early 2000s, Nesticle, ZSNES, stuff like that. Like it was absolutely amazing for me. I like, yeah, because you went, I don't know if people can who didn't grow up during that time can really understand what it was like to go from maybe knowing about like 10 to 20 NES games, like the 5 maybe you owned and then your neighbors had a couple, to 800 or 750 games overnight, and just like having, as then Super Nintendo, and like it was like discovering like a lost city. It was absolutely amazing, and it being free was like a huge benefit as well. And yeah, it was such a fun time. And then Japanese games and translations and ROM hacks and stuff like that. It was really fun, and really like just like nothing. Similar to Napster, maybe a similar experience to that, but I feel like Napster was actually later, or Kazaa, and eventually like
a little later.
yeah, but similar kind of. Whereas now, like everything's just online all the time. I don't know if people like kids who maybe were born after 2000 could really appreciate what that was like to go to have that flood of information that wasn't available. Like it literally didn't exist the day before, and it was there. So yeah, it was fun. So I have positive feelings about it. Yeah, I guess that's my final.
Of course, and I wasn't trying to like going after you or anything. I was just
no, not at all. I just like,
you have a unique perspective opposed to you ask me. I'll be like, yeah, the emulation is fine, you know.
Yeah, and like from the homebrew scene, I think there's definitely like it gets weirder there because those games are still for sale.
Mm-hmm.
And then it gets extra weird because some of them never had ROM releases. So like, yeah, like there's games that I want to look at in an emulator, like homebrew releases that don't have a ROM, that I would like, this is always the argument, I would happily pay for it if they would sell it to me. But I want to like deconstruct it and see how it works and stuff like that. So those are really painful. Where I just like, I just really want the ROM to look at, but I know like morally, I don't feel like I should, but I probably still will. And yeah, I just live with myself, I guess. Cognitive dissonance, I guess. Yeah.
Personal life, if you can disclose it. If not, don't worry about it. But can you tell us where does the nickname Goose come from?
Well, yeah, this is how I remember it. I don't know how true. Like, so basically, my nickname was Goose in high school, and okay, the way I remember it is my last name's Hughson, and then that would get abbreviated to Hughes, and then just one of my friends called me Hughes the Goose, and that was it.
Yeah, kids are clever that way, you know.
Yeah, that was my friend.
If I can tell you, when it comes to like name and last name, especially being that different, you know, if I can tell, like we'll have a whole video just stuff like that.
Most people think it's Top Gun related or something, but
I thought that's what I thought. Now, is that something that was in high school, or as you went into different studios that carried on?
The name, you mean?
The nickname, yeah.
Yeah, nobody really calls me Goose anymore, actually.
Sorry, I'm hoping it doesn't come back.
No, I don't mind it. It's just like, it was like friend, like I grew up in a different city, So I moved here. All my friends that would have called me Goose still live in like the Toronto area, and I'm on the West Coast now. So, and it's not an obvious nickname, so it didn't really follow me here. Yeah, so
let me share a picture with you, and if you don't mind, if you can give us a little context on this.
That was when I was working at Radical on the game Prototype 2, probably at this point. It doesn't have a very interesting story. I basically went on vacation. I used to drink a lot of Diet Pepsi, and when I came back, my coworkers had put all this on my desk.
Were they empty or they were all full cans?
They're all full, yeah, because we had a stocked kitchen. It's so maybe not super interesting, but I have 3 monitors there plus a TV, and I had to like fight tooth and nail for that 3rd monitor because it was so considered just so like above what people should be doing. But now it's like standard with every job I have now. But anyway, I find it funny thinking back to how much of a big deal people made of that. But yeah, that was it looks like a PS3 dev kit on the bottom left there. I think that was PS3.
Okay.
And probably a 360 dev kit on the right under there. And then like I'm surprised I had a LCD monitor. That was probably just after we stopped using CRTs. We were still using them. Yeah, I think this was Prototype 2 probably. Oh, and I had that sweet footrest under there from IKEA. I forgot about that. I love that thing. Should get one of them. And then a couple board games as well. Citadels and Bonanza. I still got them right here, actually.
I was actually trying to tell what that was. I didn't know if they were books or snacks.
No, those are board games. I'm not sure what's on top of them though.
Okay.
Yeah, that was a really like fun studio to work at. One of the best projects I worked on. It was the first I worked at EA prior to that, and it was on the central online team there. So I got credits on tons of games because we did the online component of basically all of the sports games, but I never really felt like I was part of those teams. I was kind of a client, like basically outsourcing almost. Whereas, and then I left there for Radical to work on the Prototype series, well, to work on a whole bunch of games, but they all got canceled basically, except for Prototype. And when those shipped, that was the first time I really felt like I was a real professional game developer, and I could look at things in the game and say like, oh, I built that and I came up with that design, or I had that influence. So yeah, that one holds a special spot in my heart for sure.
Okay.
Where'd you get that picture, by the way? I didn't even know that was online.
Your Facebook, actually. Your Facebook, and I'm sorry. I swear I'm not a stalker, but when
it's okay. That's funny.
Hey, maybe I can find something fun, to surprise you with. And I promise, like, I'm not, like, ooh, like he's following me now. Like I'm not that weirdo, for all you know.
Yeah, it's always a good sign when you have to say I'm not a weirdo.
So I saw that, and I mean, you see family stuff, and I was like, well, that's a little intrusive. And then I saw that picture, and I was like, well, that's interesting. And that, based on the context that I saw, because you're right, it said coming from vacation, I was like, oh, okay. So it's at a studio. Who knows which one? But it's at a studio. Maybe we can bring it up. And like I mentioned, I can always take it out if it's a a with you.
Not at all. No, that's fun to see that again. Actually, I haven't
sorry, I was scrolling through your Facebook uninvited.
No, I would make it private if I cared. That's cool.
Moving on, who are your biggest inspirations in the video game industry, or what are your biggest inspirations currently?
From like a professional side, I feel like one of the games I look at the most these days is Fortnite. Actually, I think from a design perspective, it's just one of the absolute best design games. There's a lot to it that I think is great, but I think like the most fundamental thing I think they do that is special is making the game fun, regardless of whether you win or lose, which for like a battle royale is pretty important because 1 in 100 people win. And on top of that, they create this dynamic where if you haven't played Fortnite, it's drop 100 people on an island that fight to the death. But what they do is they add quest lines, almost like an MMO on top of that. So at any given time, someone might be trying to win the game, but another person might be trying to complete a quest line. Another person might be trying to collect all the characters. Another person might be trying to fish all the fish, because they're all like collectathon things. And it creates this dynamic where I can progress in what I'm interested in doing, say a sub quest. And even if I get killed, it doesn't matter. So I'm still happy. Then for the person who's actually trying to win, that is getting all those kills, it feels super satisfying. It makes you feel like you're amazing at this game, where I can win Fortnite Battle Royale or finish top 10 at least with minimal effort. But if I go to something like PUBG or Call of Duty Warzone, like, it's very rare that I can have that experience. And I think it's because everybody's a tryhard. Everybody's trying to win those games every match, because that's how you play that game. And I feel like Fortnite is on a different level. It's created this, it's as close to me as like a metaverse experience, where there's so much going on. There's so many things to do. It's like the battle royale part of it is just like one little nugget of like a much bigger ecosystem. And on top of that, you have all the amazing licensing and characters. So like Optimus Prime is fighting Goku, and Naruto is like hiding in the trees. Like, it's just like a Saturday morning cartoon, like dream experience. So anyway, that I think about that game a lot for like that experience. That's really specific, but I love, and that's just one part of it. I think kind of top to bottom, that game is like really deserves the spot it has as kind of one of the number one games out there right now. I know it's kind of a basic answer, but it's the truth. Yeah. And then like on the homebrew side, like I'm really like, yeah, one of the best parts about homebrew is how accessible everyone is, and that like everyone who's making games is kind of all hanging out together. So I take a lot of inspiration from everybody who's actively working on stuff. And I really appreciate the people who post regularly and share their progress. So yeah, I take a lot of inspiration from that. Mostly like inspiration's maybe the wrong word, but like motivation. I sometimes feel like burnt out at the end of the day and don't want to work on my game. And then I'll go on Twitter and see somebody posting like a little GIF, and I'll go, okay, I gotta get in there too, and kind of keeps me going and gets me excited. I'm not sure if you're the same. Like, I'm guessing based on what you do, but you're probably the same, where the end game of homebrew isn't really the thing, like the thing that's exciting. Like these games aren't the best games in the world. For many reasons, like the technical limitations. It's made often by one person. Maybe they're more of a technical person than a designer, or maybe they're a designer that can't realize their vision because of technical constraints. So to me, the real draw is the people and the process, and seeing the steps along the way, and talking to people, and seeing the highs and lows, and kind of getting. So I have a big homebrew collection, but it's not really what I'm interested in. I'm interested in the people behind the games, and how they kind of got there, and the stories and stuff like that. So this is the story of the development as opposed to the story of the game itself. So that's what I find inspiring, and it keeps me going. Like I really like being a part of this community. It's like nothing I've ever been a part of from game development, where like you mentioned some of the games, like Swipe Tap Smash was a Windows phone game, an Android phone game. Power Swipe was another game I made for Android. Made a bunch of little like PC games along the way, and nothing ever like came of it. They kind of just get released, a couple people play them, and then they disappear into the void of indie games, which is like even crazier now. Back then it was pretty small, and in my earlier games there was almost no indie games, but just never got traction. There's no like cohesive community around most of these things. There's just like Steam, and like what people are playing on Steam changes every day, and and there's a million games on there. So it's really hard to kind of stand out and actually build a community, and meet people like yourself who are like take an active participation in the game and the game development, and actually care what you're doing and want to talk about it and stuff like that. So the homebrew community it's really small, but as I mentioned earlier, it's really passionate. And I think that's way better than being a small fish in a big pond. I'd much rather just be a small fish in a small pond with a bunch of other small fish that care about
More
what we're
gratifying,
doing.
right?
What's that? Sorry.
More gratifying.
Yeah, it's like, because I don't know, like I don't know if there's something like that you work on that is maybe similar to this, but something I learned very early in my career was the release of a game, even a really big game, it's very short-lived. Like that excitement and rush, even on the biggest game, like Last of Us or something, like it's only in the news for a week and then it's gone. And especially if it's a single player game that doesn't have like a multiplayer esports community. So like, if that's the only thing that you're kind of chasing is that release moment, it's very disappointing. You have to kind of enjoy the ride, and like, cliche, but it's the journey, not the destination. It's really true for game development and probably anything like that takes a long time, that you have to invest a long time in. So anyway, that wasn't really answering your question, but I think that's part of why I do so much like social media and stuff like that, and Discord, talking with you and other people on there, like, because that's the fun part for me. Like the final release, like Witch and Wiz, it was fun for a month while it was on LRG, and there's a lot of talking about it and stuff like that. But after that, it's like the main, like the bigger sphere, it's left that consciousness very quick. But the people who are kind of in that small community will keep on kind of talking about it. But I don't know, kind of rambling a bit, but and talking about different concepts. But it's one why I kind of like talking about games throughout the development, because it kind of prolongs that excitement and the fun of development, but also why I think a small passionate community is much better than a bigger one that maybe makes a big splash when the game comes out and but then disappears. I'd much rather be, I don't know, be able to talk to people one-on-one. And
to the uninitiated, you mentioned it. You talked about mappers earlier, so this is perfectly fitting for that. To the uninitiated, mappers in a NES game are chips or upgrades designed to extend the system's capabilities and bypass its limitations. In this case, the mapper from below is mapper 0, right? Or also known as NROM. Despite of not having mapping capabilities, NROM does support some basic animations, tile animations, swapping between pattern tables and stuff like that. However, NES Dev has gone on record as calling it a poor man's C and ROM. So would you care to unpack that thought or explain for the one of like some of us who don't fully, like, we're not programmers. So what is that? What does that mean, and what these limitations are from a programmer's perspective?
Yeah, so like at a basic level, a mapper means memory mapper. So the NES essentially knows about a small chunk of memory and like the system itself. It's always only going to try and grab like 8 kilobytes of graphics and 32 kilobytes of program ROM or whatever it is. I might have got it wrong, but something like that. So no matter what you do, that's always going to be true. The hardware is built to that. So what mappers do is redirect those requests. So when it says, give me the graphics, instead of just having a direct link to the graphics, it hits a little chip that says, oh, right now, give it this graphics. And on a later level, give it this graphics. So it's remapping the memory kind of on the fly. So from the system's perspective, it's still 40K or whatever, 40 kilobytes, whatever it is. But on the cartridge is much more than that. And you can still only do one at a time, essentially, but you can kind of redirect it on the fly. So MMC1 is the reason I chose it. It's basically like, it's kind of like NROM, but just with more memory. So it doesn't do any additional, like you can have a lot of hardware on the cartridge, which maybe I'll talk about in a second, but MMC1 doesn't really have any of that. It just essentially has more memory. As to why it's like the poor man's CNROM, I don't know. Actually, I don't know enough about CNROM, but it's probably like it does everything MMC1 does and more, would be my guess, is why someone would say that. So yeah, but with Super Sunny World, it moved to MMC3, which is kind of an upgrade of MMC1. So it's got the additional memory, but it also adds an additional scanline counter. So things like parallax scrolling, that's not really, I don't want to say it's not possible. It's very challenging on stock NES hardware. So the cartridge adds some additional hardware which can detect, like, it can basically count what line you're rendering And so as you're rendering down, you say, okay, I hit the bottom of the clouds, shift the scrolling faster now. And I hit the bottom of the train track, scroll it super fast now. And that's how you get the parallax effect. So it adds that, which I'm hoping to use in Super Sunny World. And I've done some experiments with it, so it seems to work. But that's the main reason I got it. But then there's other, like there's lots of different configurations. There's like 250 kind of or more. I try to avoid talking too much hardware, to be honest, because I'm pretty like not hardware savvy, and the people who are hardware savvy probably go crazy when I say this stuff and it's not quite accurate. So I'll try to be vague, but there's a lot of mappers with various configurations, memory configurations. Like, does it use read-only memory or RAM? Oh yeah, and MMC3 adds, or sorry, MMC1 also added battery save. Which I used on Witch and Whiz. And then there's like things like MMC5, which allows for like in general terms, like more detailed coloring to the games. So instead of being limited to 16 by 16 blocks, you can color in 8 by 8 blocks on the NES. There's like, yeah, stuff like that. And then it gets like really crazy, like Super Tilt Bros, the kind of Smash Brothers homebrew that's coming out, has a Wi-Fi chip on it, so you can play online on your NES. Yeah, so like you can kind of do, you can take it quite far. And then there's Former Dawn, which has invented a whole new mapper as well, which does like full motion video, all sorts of stuff. So there's a lot of opportunity.
These, I believe, it's what the uses, right?
Say that again. Sorry.
It was I saw a test run, I think, of the one you're talking about, where it was like probably like a Matrix scene, and it was like an FMV on that.
Maybe, yeah. I don't know if I saw the Matrix one, but he did like I think Chrono Trigger FMV, and then there's yeah, he's done a couple, but it does more than that too. Like the gameplay looks almost not quite Super Nintendo, but it looks like something weird. Like not weird, weird's the wrong word, but like it doesn't look like an NES game, but it doesn't look like a Super Nintendo game either. It's like some weird, like some console that never existed. But it all runs on real hardware, and they just through mappers on the hardware kind of blow out the amount of graphic, like animations and stuff like that they can do.
Do you have any regrets using the CN-ROM mapper? Once somewhere in the middle of the development you realize, oh, I wish I would have picked, or that never happened?
No, I was really happy with it was MMC1 that I used, not CN-ROM, but I was
for From Below?
For Witch and Whiz. Oh, From Below used
Sorry,
NROM.
I was talking about the CN-ROM for From Below.
Right, not CN-ROM, that's NROM. Anyway, getting too like nitty.
I'm sorry, you're right, NROM.
Yeah. No, like, so my goal with From Below was to learn how to make a game for the NES, and when you learn how to make a game for a mapper, it's almost like learning another console on top of it. Not quite that complex, but there's like a whole nother layer of technical knowledge you have to gain to use that additional mapper. It's, now that I've done it, I know it's not that much, but at the time it's quite overwhelming, right? Because you're just trying to get like a sprite on the screen. You're not thinking about like, oh, how can I do parallax scrolling or have 300 like tile sets? You're like, I just need to get one thing on the screen. So I'm quite methodical in how I work. So I was very happy to like isolate, not have to worry about any of that, limit the scope of things by putting on NROM. The only thing I really regret not having is battery backed memory to save high scores and stuff like that, which the Game Boy version does have. I added that.
Talking about the Game Boy version, do mappers work the same way on the Game Boy?
I'm not as familiar with it, but my impression is that no. Like, so the Game Boy hardware has a lot of the stuff I mentioned built into it. So like scanline counters, the coloring is much more extensive on Game Boy Color than the NES. So I think maybe the hardware requirements, like the need to extend the hardware, wasn't as strong, but I'm not really sure. I think it's mostly just memory, more memory. So more tile sets, more graphics, more sprites, stuff like that. But I'm like, that was pretty, the tool chain I used, GBDK and ZBG, were these two libraries, those C libraries I was mentioning for the Game Boy. They abstracted that away mostly. I kind of just set a flag to say I want 256K or whatever it was, and it just did the configuration for me. So yeah, I'm not super familiar, but I don't think there's many mappers for Game Boy. I think it's much smaller. I'm sure I'm driving somebody crazy right now, though. If they're watching this and they're Game Boy developer, they're probably.
We'll get it in the comments for all.
Yeah, downvote. Yeah, I apologize. I don't know what I'm.
It's my fault. I asked the wrong question too. So, does it bother you that sometimes when it comes to forums and communities, that From Below sometimes has been referred to as a Tetris clone?
No, not at all. Like, no, it is what it is. Like as I mentioned, like I went into it intentionally taking kind of a well understood mechanic with a twist. For the same reason I went with the simplest like mapper NROM, is because I wanted to limit the variables as I'm learning this new hardware. Like I know it's going to be a struggle to figure this out, so I don't need to also be figuring out like a new game design at the same time. It's the reason like people always make Tetris, Pong, Breakout, like those kind of games as their first projects when they're learning programming, because you don't want to like have to both design a game and figure out how to program at the same time. You want to like just focus on the programming and have essentially a roadmap in front of you of what the end goal is supposed to look like. So yeah, no, not at all. Like my goal is that when people play it, they say like, this is the best feeling falling block puzzle game on the NES. Like if they said it sucked, that would bother me more than if they said it was a clone. Like I don't think there's a lot of original ideas in there. I think what I'm trying to do is take something and make it better than it's ever been. That's kind of my goal. I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel. I'm trying to like modernize it. It's similar to Super Sunny World. Like I want to take something that's well understood, but there's 35 years of like design evolution since those days. So there's a lot of easy wins that I can do, not because I'm particularly clever, but just because I exist 35 years later. I know like, oh, people want to save their game. They don't want to like write down passwords or whatever it is.
Quality of life improvements.
Yeah, stuff like that. And like in the falling block genre, like there's things that just didn't exist back then that are commonplace now that I'm sure if they knew about them back in the day, they would have added it, but they didn't have the benefit of knowing what's going to come, obviously. So I'm able to kind of, add that stuff in.
During the pitch of the pause thing, you mentioned that it was described as elevator music. When you were working with Tui or Tui, am I saying it wrong?
Tui.
When you were
That's what I've been told. I always said Tui, but then I was on another podcast.
Try to get it right, yeah. So working with Tui, did you have a music background yourself, or do you play any instruments, or did you have a say on what notes go here, or this is exactly what I'm like expecting, or did he have creative freedom when it came to this? Because the music is outstanding. Actually, pretty much all your games have outstanding music.
He does all my music. So. Oh, except for Super Sunny World. He didn't do that. But all my released games he did. I don't remember like the exact. So first of all, no, I'm not much of a musician. I do play like guitar and drums and been in bands and stuff like that, but I'm not like a classically trained musician or anything like that. I think I have like a pretty good sense of what I like and what I don't like. So I don't remember like the process too much on From Below. Like again, it was a free, like he was working on it for free. So I was probably pretty chill about feedback. I'm not gonna like
you were not rejecting. No.
Yeah, I probably just gave him, I think I sent him a bunch of examples of the kind of stuff I wanted for him to kind of use as inspiration. But I'm pretty sure he sent me almost exactly what's in the game, like right off the bat, and we just made a couple tweaks here and there. I remember that, yeah, there was a couple like minor things like high-pitched noises for whatever reason with my speaker system were like really coming through strong and weren't for him, like little stuff like that. But no, generally he kind of just, I give him a bunch of like direction on like themes and like style of music and stuff like that, and he usually just comes back with like some early like riffs on what he's thinking, and I'll thumbs up, thumbs down if it's way off. But generally he's kind of, I'm definitely not like writing notes, like picking notes on a staff or anything like that. No, I'm like, oh, it's too like, sounds too much like a circus, or like it's too sad, or it's too happy, it's supposed to be scary, it's that kind of thing. But really, like I think I'm kind of, again, pretty basic on my NES chiptune. Like I love like all the stuff everybody else loves, Mega Man, DuckTales, like all that stuff. So really, like in the end, that's kind of what I'm. And I think for From Below, I asked for some Mega Man like music for the title screen because I wanted something really like get you pumped up. But
yeah, it gets you pumped for sure. That's mission accomplished on that end. The gameplay of From Below has some of the most polished, satisfying controls of the 8-bit era, or at least on the 8-bit platform. You included wall kicks, T-spins, as we talked about. But however, I'm curious as to know, why did you decide not to include holds, or is that the locks you were talking about earlier?
No, yeah, lock delay is when a piece lands, it doesn't lock in right away. You have a few seconds.
Oh, you can still move it. You're right. Tetris 99 has that. You can still have a few seconds to kind of.
Yeah. Tetris 9 or like Tetris Grandmaster, I think, is like crazy. Like that's how people do like the, I can't see anything modes and stuff. But anyway, it's not to that extreme. But yeah, so that's what lock delay is. But the holds, I don't remember. I think I just thought, I can't remember if I asked the hardcore Tetris guys what they thought, and they were like, don't do holds, that ruins the balance or something. But I don't know. I don't remember. I don't think I had a super strong feeling on it. I think it's just like in my head with a game like this that's pretty short, and I don't really want to extend the life of it too much. Like I'd much rather have fast, quick games and that be part of the experience. Like it's not, your goal isn't to last half an hour. Your goal is to like, everybody's only going to last a few minutes, and you're trying to get as much points as you can within that time limit. And that's the same reason at the end, I don't know if you've seen it, but once you reach level 30, the floor starts rising. And basically it essentially creates a soft kill screen. So by level 40, you're basically playing on half the screen, because the bottom half is filled with unbreakable blocks. So it doesn't end the game outright, but it makes sure the game doesn't last 2 hours, because that's one of the problems with Tetris on the NES is games can go on for like a really long time, because once you've kind of mastered that level 30 plus speed, it doesn't get any harder. That's basically it. So I wanted to make sure there was an ending to the game, which was one of the early things I didn't realize that people called out, especially with lock delay and stuff. Suddenly, like playing at the speeds of NES Tetris are a lot more manageable. So people were just going forever, and it was getting boring because they don't want to play forever. They want to end it. And in NES Tetris, there is a kill screen, I think anyway, or people play to like how fast can I get to 1 million, stuff like that, because they don't want to just play forever. So anyway, that's kind of, it wasn't like holds in particular. I don't think were ever like super considered, but they were like, I think part of the vision of the game was to keep it fast and frantic and not last forever. And like we haven't talked about it, but I made that game Minecart Madness, which was a game jam game, and that was similar, where I can't remember what the time is, but it basically has a timer. You have 5 minutes or 2 minutes, and I knew that like the game wasn't going to be fun forever. Like you couldn't just play this on endless loop. So I figured the fun part would be creating a really short timer and just making it how much can you get done in that amount of time. And it's almost a puzzle game, an action puzzle game, but similar idea where I just want to condense. I want to design the game around 2 minutes and just make it all. Or Pac-Man CE. I don't know if you've ever played that. Pac-Man Championship
the competition edition.
Yeah, that's similar.
The one that you can. I played it.
Yeah, that's a similar idea where you just have 5 minutes or whatever it is. And it's just how much can I get done in that 5 minutes? And it's always 5 minutes. And I think there's something quite compelling about that for those kind of like arcade games. For something like a Mario style game, I don't quite feel the same. I want to give you mechanics that you can extend your life and last longer and longer each time you play. But for those kind of classic arcade games, I like the idea of them not lasting too long, not overstaying their welcome is maybe a way of putting it.
Minecart Madness, that was a question up ahead actually. I read during the research, I was actually surprised to find out like, oh, that's another NES game he made. And I believe that was for a competition, right?
Yeah.
And that was, I believe you described that you were inspired on the railroad cart levels of Donkey Kong Country, right?
Yeah.
Now, here's my question regarding that. Would you ever make that one available physically as a cartridge, or is it that's why you don't feel?
I don't feel as confident in that game. Like it was really rushed. Like I can't remember how long I spent on it, but it was like a couple weeks kind of thing. So it's a little too deterministic the way it ended up. Like there really is it's a solvable game. Like there is an ideal path. And because there's limited movement, right? You're kind of always moving. There's that 2-minute timer I mentioned. So it's like Pac-Man, the original Pac-Man. Like there is a solvable path that is the optimal way to play the game. So anyway, that makes me hesitant to kind of sell it to somebody because I know it's a bit of a dead end. So I feel like if I was going to sell it, I would want to take it a bit further, but it should be part of the Action 53 cartridge. So just a bit of background. So that competition, the NES Dev competition, last year I helped to run it. It's been going on for like 10 years, but the guy who usually runs it was busy this year, so he wasn't able to do it. So I helped run that. And one of the cool parts about that competition, it's like a game jam style competition for the NES. But the idea is that at the end of the competition, all the games get put onto a physical NES multi-cart, like a 52-in-1 kind of thing. And anybody who enters a game into the competition gets a free copy of the cartridge. So going back to that, what I talked about earlier about having your first game like on a physical NES cartridge and seeing that, like that's an amazing moment for people. This is a way for homebrew developers, or maybe people who don't have the time to do a full-fledged game release, they can actually have that experience and they can have their game on a real cartridge that works on an NES. And the cool part about it is they sell the cartridge as well, and the funds from the sales go into prizes for the next year. So it's actually the NES Dev competition actually has a cash prize for the top 5 games, I think.
That's cool.
So it's a pretty cool experience. So Witch and Wiz was, I think, got second place for the NES Dev competition in 2020, I think. So it started as a smaller competition game, and then Minecart Madness was entered in the next one. I think it got third or fourth or something like that. But yeah, it's really cool. And a lot of like the big games in the NES homebrew scene come out of that. Project Blue, Nebs and Debs. I don't know. There's a ton. I'm forgetting some for sure, but Twin Dragons. There's lots. Like if you're into NES homebrew, it's like a bit of an incubator for what's going to be the next big games. Often the top few games turn into full releases later.
The NES days have a great footnote and a great test market tool. It's called the Nintendo versus arcade system, right? So for the ones who don't know, this is a series of arcade cabinets based on the same hardware than the NES, essentially. And Nintendo will focus on two-player titles pretty much and release them as arcade ports first before deciding what titles they should release to the public. So good idea, because you can make money, while sort of sampling testing something, right? So my question is, why did you decide to make a version of From Below for the Versus arcade system, which is something that, to give some insight on, to people, in 30 years, nobody has ever made a homebrew for this system. You're breaking ground in the homebrew community for that. How does that make you feel, and what was your why did you decide to do that?
Yeah, so definitely feels good. The why part, yeah, I wasn't familiar with the Versus arcade really at all. I think I knew about it, but I think I thought it was like a Play Choice 10, which were
That's
like
exactly what I thought. I thought they
Yeah.
were the same thing. I didn't know there was different.
Exactly, yeah. So as you said, it's not the same. It is like basically an NES in an arcade cabinet. There's some differences, but you can kind of think of it as that. And what got me into it was actually just a random message from a guy named Dewey on Twitter, who just said like, hey, I took From Below and put it on a chip for he had a Versus arcade, and it works. And like, it was all messed up, the graphics looked wrong and stuff like that, but it basically worked. And he was like,
I remember seeing those pictures, I believe.
Okay, yeah, maybe you can put them up. Yeah, so that was, I'm very like motivated by, I think, low-hanging fruit maybe is like a common theme amongst how I approach things. So to me, that's like, oh, that's a whole new platform. The more I look into it, the cooler it is. Stuff like you said, like, oh, nobody's made a game for this in 30 years. Like, I could be the first. That's pretty exciting. It seems like a cool arcade system I never heard of, and there's a pretty big community, not big, pretty passionate community behind it, who I think like would be excited to have a new game for the first time. Like, they basically been playing the same 12 games for years. So yeah, it just seemed like very plausible that I could do it. And the basic port was very, very simple. It was essentially the Versus arcade systems have a different PPU, like a graphics chip, which essentially scrambles the colors. So to get the game running, essentially all I had to do was unscramble the colors. So essentially, like, let's say what is yellow on the NES is red on the Versus system. So everywhere I want red, I draw yellow, and that basically turns out to be red on the Versus system, if that makes sense. But it's not a very complicated process. So getting that far was really easy. And then Dewey, the guy who originally reached out, he helped me test a whole bunch too on real hardware, because the emulator support isn't, it's really good on Messen, but it's pretty much the only place it works. And I'm not sure how accurate it actually is. So it's good to have somebody testing on real hardware. So then once I had that, yeah, Dewey suggested, like, hey, you should make this a real arcade game rather than just the NES game running on the arcade hardware, which meant things like detecting coins. There's this like counter that counts how many times people play the game that's actually in the hardware. There's also some things like an attract mode, so that it doesn't sit on the title screen and burn your CRT. So especially for collectors, that's something they worry about, because those monitors on the Versus cabinets are quite rare. So an attract mode, so it kind of loops through a screensaver, essentially, let's say. And then also updating the UI, because you don't really want little text in an arcade game. So I added big icons, covered a kind of the nuance of picking level and made it difficulty based, adding a high score table, kind of all the things you expect from an actual arcade game. So I ended up adding all that, which added, of course, a bunch of development time, but it was pretty fun. It was cool to work on. I had hoped to get a save game working on it, because the Versus arcade system does actually have battery backed RAM that I can use, but I could never get it working. And in the emulator, it just crashed. So I was pretty limited on like how I could actually debug it.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying it was very hard to develop that side of it. If it doesn't work in the emulator and I don't own the hardware, I basically have to make a guess at how to fix it, send it to this guy who then burns it to a ROM chip, puts it in his system and tells me if it works or not. And it's way too slow and
You're right.
it's worth it. Yeah.
So does that mean from below versus, I guess, you can, I was going to ask, do you think a physical release of the card with like dip switches on the back, which I've seen some of those people are able to do that in some form of repro in a way, in a repro card. Does that mean from below versus will never see the light of day as a physical release? Or
no, it could. I did.
Small?
Yeah, I did think about doing exactly what you said, kind of like the World Championship cartridge, with the dip switches built in and stuff. Yeah, it just seemed like in the end, what you'll end up with is, yeah, it's just a little too like, it's not different enough from the NES version, I thought, because most of the dip switches control arcade functionality, like free play, which would have to be on by default because there's no way to put coins in your NES. They control which graphics chip to use, and there's only one in the NES. And then they turn off music and stuff, which you can already do in the NES version. So it just seemed like not really worth. In the end, I don't know who would want it aside from the most hardcore, and that's pretty custom hardware to have dip switches and stuff. So yeah, it kind of just fizzled out. I wouldn't mind doing it like maybe someday as a special,
like a small run.
Yeah, I don't know, but yeah, that's why it didn't really go anywhere.
From below secrets, we mentioned them earlier. You have the start on level 10 to 19. On the settings screen, you press 8 plus start, and then basically if you're on level 8 and you do that, that will be equivalent to 18, right? For example, for level 29, I believe you have to press select and start simultaneously, right? Mm-hmm. And the sound test, you did the classic Konami code, up, down, left, right, and so on. Are any of these secrets gonna work on the Game Boy Pocket version?
Yeah, so all the level starting stuff does for sure. I'm trying to remember if I left the sound test in or not. I can't actually remember. I don't think it has the sound test in it. I must have removed it. Yeah, not there. Sorry.
Not the Konami.
I don't know if I actually added it or not. I'm trying to remember now. But sorry, it's been like
find out when it's released, you know?
Yeah. Well, I can't do it right now, so I think it's not in there, but it's possible like I'm hitting a turbo button or something.
It could be.
Instead of, yeah, but yeah, it's actually, so like I finished development on From Below like Pocket, I think like a year ago almost now. So it's basically just been sitting waiting for the hardware to be ready. Mm-hmm. So like the actual development of it and stuff like you're saying, like the cheats and stuff like that, it's actually not very fresh in my mind. It feels like forever since I even looked at this game.
I don't fault you. I mean, completely understand. And that's getting released through MorphCat, I believe.
No, I'm going to release it myself on my own store, but Broke Studio is going to do all the manufacturing and shipping.
That's what it was. The manufacturing was
yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, so this is, well, since we kind of started talking, they did forget which game, I don't want to get it wrong. So they did a Kickstarter with somebody for a Game Boy game, but we're essentially working on the first Game Boy games that they've ever done. They've done like Genesis, NES, Super Nintendo, but this is the first Game Boy game. So it's been a bit of a long haul to get the hardware right, printing boxes, manuals, like they have to kind of do everything for the first time. So it's been a while, basically since it's now end of July, and we started, I think, in November last year, kind of working on this. So we're close though, another month or two, and it should be already. Essentially, I think he has everything he thinks he needs from a hardware standpoint. He just needs to do some final testing. And my goal with this, like after doing limited run, essentially the way they work is they take pre-orders and then they go off and start figuring out how to build it. And you end up taking pre-orders and then shipping the game a year later. So I kind of wanted to avoid that on this one. I want to get everything lined up now so that when I take pre-orders, we can essentially ship them right away. We'll still have to build them, but all the hardware will be established. We'll know exactly how to build it. So it should just be like within weeks of the pre-order ending that we should be able to ship them. So it kind of sucks that it's taken so long to get it out the door, but hopefully for most people, they're not thinking about the game every day. They probably couldn't care less. So it'll, in the end, I think it'll be a better experience. They'll go to the store, they'll order it, and a few weeks later, they'll get their copy instead of waiting a year.
Makes sense.
On the Indie Dev Break podcast,
you talked about your top 5 personal games, which were number 5 was Dragon Quest or Dragon Warrior. 4 was Alex the Alligator 4. Am I saying that correctly? I believe it was Windows or a Pico version, I believe.
Windows, yeah.
I'm sorry?
It was a Windows game, yeah.
Windows game, right? Zelda 2 was your number 3. Number 2 was Micro Mages, a homebrew game for the ones who are not aware, which was actually, you have talked about Micro Mages in the past, and I feel the same way when you describe it. I like homebrews. I love homebrews and I respect homebrews, but Micro Mages just felt like an official release. Like you could have seen it in a poster back in those little screen posters back in the 80s, and it would have been the game that you have to play this type of thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I also have it. I have a little bit of a homebrew collection, complete in box as well. And your number 1, which we talked about, Super Mario Bros. 1, which, as I mentioned, I'm a huge fan myself. So you have an honorable mention, by the way, Lizard, which I never heard of, and I'm gonna look into it a little bit to see if at least I can get on the emulated side, at least get to experience it, because I'm not sure if it's still available on a physical release. So as an NES aficionado, as you and I are, I want to bounce back some of my personal favorites, and I want you to give me your first thoughts, reactions, or opinions. And if you haven't heard about any of them, I mean, sorry then, but let me know either way. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Snake, Rattle, and Roll.
Yeah, good game. I like it a lot. I think that was one of the ones that like was I never heard of until like emulators. I was like, this is such a cool, crazy game. Isometric by Rare, I think.
Yeah,
I love it. I wouldn't say I love it. I think it's pretty cool. I haven't spent enough time with it to like say I love it, but it is so like I didn't mention this yet, but I used to collect NES games. I had like about 300, 350, 400 games at its peak, and a few years ago I basically sold everything except for like what I consider the quintessential collection for the NES, which is about 100 games, and Snake, Rattle, Roll is in there. So
I grew up with that game, and actually, funny thing you mentioned about game collecting, because that was going to be a question up ahead. Like, why did you get rid of? I thought you got rid of a whole collection, but I guess you just trim it down to what you really were playing, I guess.
Yeah, and I collected like a bunch of other systems as well, like Virtual Boy, N64, PlayStation, and those were like stuff I really was not playing at all. They were just sitting on a shelf, so I was like, I don't need all this. And then as part of that, like when you collect NES games, there's a lot of garbage and like so much stuff that I had no interest in playing. So I was just like, yeah, with emulation, what it is, I don't need these around.
The next one is, have you ever heard of Pusnik? Puzznic.
Oh, is it a Game Boy game?
I might have come out on Game Boy. I will have to check because I'm not sure. I love the game itself, and now I'm wondering if it's a franchise because you never saw that revamped again, at least not on my radar. It's essentially a mix of Tetris, like falling pieces game, and a little bit of like those Jewel games. But this is, probably one of the originals where you have to match, but you have gravity at the same time. So you have to be aware that if it kind of like your game Witch and Whiz, if you fall, you cannot go back up type of thing. So it is.
It's a Taito game, I think.
Correct. I highly recommend that game. It's one of my favorite puzzles.
Yeah, I don't know if I've really played it. Yeah, but
got it.
Recognize the name.
The next one is Batman Return of the Joker. Not the original Batman, not Batman Returns, the one with the big sprites.
Yeah. I have not played it like ever. It's on my list. Like every time it comes up, I'm like, oh, I should really go and play that. But I've never actually played it at all.
You're aware of the gameplay, of course, right? Like you've seen footage at least.
Yeah. Like I know it as exactly what you said, the Batman with the giant sprites and like the cool cover with Joker. Never played it.
16-bit like game. Like there's times that you feel like you're on a Super Nintendo, especially with the big sprites. It is like great achievement, at least from the programmer's perspective. All the different levels of parallax you have on the screen. It is.
Is it Sunsoft as well or no?
It is Sunsoft, I believe. I have it right here. It is Sunsoft, correct?
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I can see Joker poking out there.
Right?
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Yeah, that's. I think I was looking at it recently, thinking of picking it up. Okay. It's not a cheap game.
Highly recommend that. It's a lot easier with a turbo controller, but I highly recommend it regardless. Next game, Faxanadu. Not sure if I'm saying it right.
That's another one that it's in my collection as like I've just never. I've played it, but I have not like really played it, and it's on my list of things like I just want to. Yeah, I know there's like a great game there that was kind of misunderstood maybe back in the day, which is why Dragon Warrior was on my list for that reason. Like it was a little too obtuse at the time. In fact, Xanadu is like an interesting one because it gets cited a lot as, I don't know what the right word is, but it's got like a really interesting graphical style that's not common to the era. Like it's kind of abstract.
Correct, like the monsters, the environment itself. I mean, it's medieval. It's very medieval, but at the same time has a little bit of a horror in it based on the enemy and the type of gameplay that it's essentially Zelda 2, but I guess for a little more mature audience, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Ironically, I don't like Zelda 2, but I love Faxanadu, and it's essentially the same thing.
Right. Yeah. That's cool. That's definitely on my list of like, why haven't I played this yet?
Two more to bounce back off of you. A Boy and His Blob.
I hate that game.
Really?
Well, hate's too strong. No,
I mean, that's okay. I mean, it is a little obtuse, probably the word.
Well, yeah, I'm hesitant to say hate because I probably haven't spent enough time with it, but that was one of those ones where like I would hear such good things about it. And then I'm just like, this is so
That's either you hate it or you love it. Because I remember most of my friends hated it, which was easy to trade with, by the way. With my friends, I'll just keep it, as long as you want. But to me, what was gratifying about it was not knowing anything. Didn't have any gaming magazines at the moment that had any secrets or do these guides or whatever. There was not necessarily internet the way it is now back in those days, but I was able to figure. I didn't beat it until later years, but I was able to get pretty far on it, which I believe back then it was such a huge accomplishment, as a kid.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
That's probably why it hits me, on the soft spot.
Wasn't there a Game Boy version as well?
It is. And I did not know that until Limited Run re-released the game.
Right. Yeah.
Then I saw the Game Boy one, and I'm like, is that a new thing? I went straight to eBay that same day. They announced it on Twitter. I went on eBay and bought the Game Boy one. Yeah. So I was like, I need to try this. Like, how was this not in my radar?
And is it as good as the NES version for you?
It's like Snake Rattle and Roll. There was a Game Boy version of it, and both are so different. It's I wouldn't say it's a little different. And just like you said, it's something you kind of like. I love A Boy and His Blob. I want to keep it on the go, and it's not the same, but it was what you could do back then. Yeah. So it's more of a collection piece for me now. And the last one, Little Nemo the Dream Master.
I love that game. Yeah, that's one of the like. I'm trying to think. It's like one of those weird things. I don't know if I can properly describe it, but it was like having an older brother as well. It was one of the games that him and his friends would kind of rave about, and I was younger and didn't really get, or like, I don't know. It had like a kind of it was a bit on a pedestal because it was coming from the cooler older kids that were into this game, and yeah, it has a soft spot, I guess, because of that. Yeah, it's a good game. It's a great game, actually.
Definitely. It's criminally not re-release, or it could have been a franchise by now.
Yeah.
I know there's a Switch game coming out, but that's not
Yeah.
necessarily based on it's based on Little Nemo,
The
you
book.
know, the comic,
Or
but
the comic,
it's not the Dream Master. It's not the same mechanics, I believe.
Was it Capcom that made Little Nemo?
Capcom back then still is in a way, but back then on the NES game, you saw Capcom, you knew it was guaranteed to be a great game.
Yeah, absolutely.
While we were discussing my video of Infidelity's interview via Twitter for The Legend of Link Hack, I was pleasantly surprised to discover that, like me, you also consume certain content, YouTube content, during your daily commute. What is, if you don't mind, what is some of the YouTube channels that you binge watch the most in the last year, or at least that stick out the most to you?
Displaced Gamers, who does I forget what the series, I think it's called Retro Game Break.
On the sprites, frame beat.
Sorry, I just played it. Behind the Code.
Behind the Code, yes. I'm a big fan of that particular series of videos from.
Yeah, it's cool. So you find it interesting as a non-developer as well? Sometimes I wonder if he's too technical and it would just kind of get.
It is, and this is the funny thing. I was watching it with actually my buddy, who is the music composer for my channel. It's a high school friend, you know, it's one of my best friends, the best friend that I have. And we were watching it with him, and at some point, I mean, this is somebody who has straight A's, right? Or had straight A's, and I was just like always like skating by. And he was telling me at some point, he was like, dude, are you following this? And I was like, funny thing, I mean, I may not know assembler myself, but I was like, I am following, you know, kind of like concerned, like, you're not enjoying this. Like, no, I'm enjoying it. It's just that I am not having trouble following it, and you seem to be following it. And I was just surprised because, you know, you couldn't follow fractions, you know, back then. Right. And I was like, oh, it's great because it's true. You know, it got me thinking, like, I guess it's a matter of motivation.
Yeah, I was going to say, I like the topic, like seeing the game, you know, you kind of have so much backstory to like how it works, and you've probably seen the glitches and stuff he's talking about. So yeah, it's cool to hear, because I wonder that sometimes when I watch it, because sometimes I watch it too and I'm like, whoa, he's going pretty fast over some very complicated
I have no programming skills. I may have patched or cracked some stuff, but using somebody else's tools. And I probably at some point, the only coding I was able to do was basic HTML back in the 90s, actually, mid 90s. And that was it. Programming is not my forte when it comes to computing. But okay.
Cool. Yeah, so I would say Displaced Gamers is really awesome. The other one that's really good is Retro Game Mechanics Explained, which is a very similar site, or a very similar channel, where they kind of break down how well, not just NES games, multiple platforms, but I'm usually in it for the NES stuff. Yeah, those are the two that like I love, but their content, like, it must just take forever to create. It's so detailed. So they only release stuff like once a month, if that. But the other thing, like, it's not a YouTube channel, but the podcast you mentioned earlier, NES Assembly Line, or I think it's just called The Assembly Line. I can't remember.
Yes. The Assembly
That's
Line.
my favorite podcast by far for Homebrew.
That's what got you down this rabbit hole of NES gaming.
Yeah.
The Netscape episode for The Assembly Line, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So one of the developers of that NES game is a host of that show. So when I bought the game on Kickstarter, I started listening to the podcast because I think they mentioned it or something, and then started to realize, like, oh, I can actually do this too, because he came from like no technical background, I think, and was learning assembly and stuff like that. So yeah, it's a really fun podcast for if you're into NES homebrew. It just kind of, it's been going for years, so you can kind of hear, for me coming in later, like I just got into this basically in 2020, but they were recording back in, I think, like 2015. You can kind of hear what the community was doing back then. It's almost like a bit of a time travel through the eras right up to today. But yeah, it's a really good one. And then Homebrew Game Club is a more active one, newer one that I really like a lot. Another podcast, audio podcast, but it's really good. And then there's Deadeye's podcast. I'm trying to remember what it's called off the top of my head. Homebrews in Focus. So it's kind of similar to what you do, actually. Deep dives into a single game or a single developer, and then also often with like behind the scenes footage and stuff like that. So if you're into homebrew, it's really good as well. But he hasn't released an episode in, I don't know, it's got to be at least a year. So I'm not sure if he's just busy or he's kind of done with it, because I think it was probably took a toll. It was a lot of work. I'm sure.
It's a lot of work. I'm on that boat, and I got to apologize
exactly.
to viewers on that. I complained that my channel is not growing fast enough, but I'm having trouble putting content together. I mean, I found myself that this type of content, what we're doing right now, is my favorite, especially the research part of it. I really enjoy, hunting all that down, putting together the interview, talking to bouncing a couple ideas back with a couple people that help me with the channel, advisors, or my girlfriend, who's one of my editors. And that part really engages, like speaks to me in a whole different way that any other part does. I love the behind the scenes and behind the code and stuff like that, but these I really enjoy the most. I don't want to limit myself to stick to one format, but if I have to, it'll have to be this one.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's cool.
Funny thing you mentioned Homebrew Game Club podcast, because my next question was, you talked about during their podcast, you talked about the interview, finding a 400 pages Reddit post discussion about your tweet, a tweet that you have regarding cloud gaming, which has to be surreal, I believe. Yeah. And your opinion was about, just cloud gaming in general. But my question to you is, physical versus digital, what's the future for gaming? And do you have anything to add, because it's related to the concept, what happened to the Google Stadia,
Right. Well, I mean, I would take my opinion with a grain of salt. I'm definitely just like one person with no inside information or anything. But for me, like, I think streaming is the future for gaming, at least for mainstream gaming. I know like it pisses off the hardcore gamers, but like to me, it's the equivalent of like Netflix versus Blu-ray in a like 7.1 home theater like setup. There's people that care about that will want the physical Blu-ray and will want the like best audio, best video. But for 99% of people, I think they just want the easiest to access, which to me is streaming. So, and I think like the biggest like game changer for me is not that it works everywhere right now, but that it works some places. Like where I am in Vancouver, it's pretty near flawless for me on a gigabit connection. So I know like there's a lot of places that don't have that right now, but the fact that for me it works great makes me think, well, it's only going to get better for everyone else, and eventually people will have better internet connections, and we'll get there eventually. And yeah, for me, the barrier of entry is so low. Like you can get TVs now that have Game Pass, for instance, on it, like without a console, without a dongle, anything. You just turn it on, a Samsung TV, and it has Game Pass. And you now have 100 like high-end ray traced games on your TV. So even if it's a subpar, maybe video rendering or a little bit of latency within reason, I think for most people that's still a pretty compelling experience. I'm talking about like the mass population. I always think there'll be the kind of audio files and the video files that care about it, but on a different level. But yeah, I just think mass market wise, it's the future. For Stadia, like my opinion just as a gamer is that their business model made absolutely no sense, that I would pay for a streaming service and then buy games only in that ecosystem on top of that. Like it just made no sense. And I don't know anybody who plays games that thought it made sense. Like you have NVIDIA service, which is similar. You pay for the streaming service. You still have to buy games, but you're buying Steam games, or Epic Games or whatever. So like you still like have the games in Steam, even if you don't have the service anymore. So that makes sense to me. And that's like a value add. Like I have a Steam library and now I can stream it. So that's awesome. Or there's like Game Pass, which is it's a subscription like a Netflix. I subscribe to the service and now I have a buffet of games. Like those both make a lot of sense to me as a gamer. Those are both compelling things. But Stadia's was this weird middle ground, which was like the worst of both. And I don't know, I really have no clue who thought it was a good idea. Like, I don't know how you feel. Like if you talk to people who played it and were like really into that business model, but I don't know anybody. Like I work in the game industry. I sit next to gamers all day and nobody was playing Stadia because it just made no sense.
I watched a lot of reviews because I thought it was a cool idea in the beginning.
Mhm.
And like you said, I just thought it comes from Google. It can't be bad, right?
It was
And
good. Like the streaming itself for me was top notch. They were the best by far.
but it just stank, in ways that I just didn't expect it, I guess. But you're right. Like when I ask around, I wasn't interested enough on getting it because I love physical, of course. But you're right. Any of my gaming friends, I don't think I have one who not only don't own it, but told me like, I might get that. That wasn't even a thing, not even a remote option.
But I do think it was like the best streaming game quality of any of them that I played. Like the fidelity of the video and the latency on the input was like absolutely amazing to me. Even and at a much earlier time too. Like Game Pass streaming, like xCloud at the time was quite rough, and what they were doing was like absolutely brilliant. It just sucks that they didn't know how to like package it up into a thing that people would want to buy. Like I don't know why they didn't just do a subscription service, like or like I don't know. I don't, or make the streaming service free and you buy games like OnLive did years ago. I don't know. It was a weird one, but I think like the quality, like the product itself was really, really good. I thought anyway. It depends though. Like if you're in rural area with like bad internet, like it's gonna suck for sure.
Yeah, so reach everybody.
Yeah, for where I am, I love it. Like I pretty much play game streaming exclusive now for modern games. It's just so seamless. I don't want to manage my hard drive. I don't want to like even on PC, I'll play games on streaming because I don't want to have to uninstall a game to fit 100 gigabytes because games are so big now. And I don't know. It's another one of those topics though that makes people really mad, but that one I actually care about. That one I actually think I have a strong opinion.
What do you think is the most important trait for an aspiring game developer or programmer? What is it, that thing that they must have to chase that ideal dream job, in your opinion?
Well, like for the hobby side of it, like the homebrew side, I think the biggest thing that I see with people is people who like the idea of making games, but they don't actually want to do the work to kind of get it done. Like it's probably true for many things in life, but yeah, like you really have to commit to it, and like really you just need to like do the work, like do the tutorial start to finish, ask questions along the way. Don't just get stuck and say, oh, it's too hard, I can't do it. Like it's really obtainable by anybody. Like people do this who have never programmed before. If it's what you want to do, it's completely within reach. It takes time. Like for me, I talk about like the From Below being 3 months and basically how I learned game dev, but I left out a maybe important part, which is I was reading about game development in a book called I forget what it's called. It's right here. Making games for the NES. I probably should remember that. Pretty simple. Anyway, I'd been reading that for like maybe a year beforehand, just doing it a little bit every day because it's a thick, like it's a legit book, and just working my way slowly through that a little bit each day. So it's not like something overnight. It takes a long time. It just takes consistency. But I don't know, that's not super insightful, but I see it a lot though in homebrew and regular game development that people think, or they hope that it's just going to be overnight, that they're going to be able to kind of be making games but it just takes time, and you just have to see it through. You can't just stop when it gets hard. You really have to push yourself through, at least to the end of like tutorials. You got to be able to push yourself through that, and you'll come away with it like having built something. Like all tutorials are basically usually built around a small project, so you'll probably leave a tutorial having built Pong or Tetris or something like that, and that's quite a motivating and inspiring thing to do, and can kind of push you to the next level. But anyway, that's kind of for the homebrew side. For professional, it's a bit more complex. Like nowadays, to be at least from the programming like developer side, you pretty much need a comp sci degree, bachelor's in computer science or equivalent, to kind of get your foot in the door at a bigger company. So like assuming you have something like that, I think the thing that I see most that like stands out for people that I work with is people who have like attention to detail, but more so like attention to thinking about the end user and what the player is going to do, and not just thinking about like delivering a feature or completing a list of tasks, but actually thinking like, what is the end result of this? Is it a good experience for the user? If it's not, speaking up and actually fixing those things and taking ownership over that end experience as like something that they're creating, and not just a task list, but actually like something that they have a piece in. So I don't know, that's what I see separating kind of the best programmers from everyone else, is they're those kind of people that they like really think about what the player is going to experience. It sounds basic probably, especially if you're like a gamer. You're probably thinking like, of course, that's got to be the most obvious thing, but it's surprisingly not. It's easy to kind of just get into a rut where you're not a rut, but like you just have a million things to do, and you're just trying to get through tasks as quick as possible, right, to get the game out the door. And it's easy to forget about like, what is the end result of all this? How does this all come together? Is it actually like painful to use? Like there's things that you see in games all the time that you're like, how could they do this? And it's just because like they have a million things to think about. They're trying to get it out the door. They got to fix like crashes and things that actually break the game, and they have very little time or energy or motivation to think about the actual experience. It's harder than it sounds to kind of find the time and energy to do that. But there are some people who really make sure they do. So anyway, and again, long-winded answer, but it's
no, not at all. Not at all. You're talking about being a gamer during the interview. Are you, I'm just curious, are you a completionist when it comes to somebody who has the dedication you have? I'm wondering, are you like that guy who wants to just complete, especially newer consoles? Are you a completionist on that end type of?
Not at all. I'm almost the opposite. I'm like a sampler. I like, especially as I get older, I find it very, like I start to see the formula of a game very quickly, like the building blocks that are making up the game. I can see, oh, there's like this structure, and I think most people see this too. Like, okay, I after the first boss, it opens up, and now there's 7 more bosses that I have to kill in the world, and that's the structure of the game. I'm gonna have to do a stage for each one, kill the boss at the end, and then like go together. Or I'm in an open world, and I'm gonna have to like collect 100, or I do one of this mission type, and it's gonna repeat it 10 times with slightly different locations. So anyway, once I start to see the threads of how the game is designed and structured, I find I lose interest very quick. I kind of, at that point, I know what I'm going to get, and the surprise and delight of it all disappears pretty quickly for me, and it's really just a job at that point. I'm just going through the motions to finish it. Yeah, so I find I usually play games for 2 hours, and around that point, it's because that's what games are too. Like I don't fault them for it, but because often the point of a game is to introduce a mechanic and then let you master it over the next few hours, and then culminate in a big ending. So like I get why it's like that, and I make games that do the same thing. But I find that around the 2 hour mark, I can usually like know what I'm going to get, and I'm just basically seeing it in different settings. And I'd much rather just jump into something new and exciting, which, yeah, as you mentioned, is maybe like the opposite of how I am with work, which is, or like my personal projects, which is like really focus on the details and take it from start to completion and try to make sure that it, like, every bit of it is as perfect as I can make it. With actually playing games, I'm not like that at all. I'm very like broad strokes. Let me get a sense of what the game is and then move on to something else. Although games will grab me. Like I mentioned Fortnite, I play it like all the time with my daughter. StarCraft I was really into for a while. I play a lot, but I mostly like I think my like where I get the most pleasure is retro games that I've played a million times. I don't know, it's probably like a psychological thing where playing something familiar is more, because it's weird. Like I think I'm amongst my friends known for not liking like really challenging games. I play every game on easy, that kind of thing. I don't play any Souls games. But then I go and play like Mega Man, or I don't know, some game that like to the average person is considered like retro hard or whatever. But I think it's just so familiar to me that it's like a comfort, like a soul food kind of game. I don't know how to explain it, but yeah, I spend most of my time, if I'm going to game, it's either like some modern like Fortnite kind of whatever's kind of a new battle royale hotness, or something retro that I've played a million times and has nothing new to offer me, which seems very counterintuitive given what I just said about quitting games as soon as I know what's going to happen. But I don't know, that's how I game.
Well, we're at the epilogue of this conversation, and to close things up, is there anything that you're working with? I mean, we know you're working on Super Sunny World that's coming up. Would you have a projection for that?
No. Yeah, maybe I can just list off a whole bunch of stuff for you.
And of course, for people, don't forget to get your copy of From Below Pocket, which is coming up pretty soon, in order to get your copy. Go ahead.
Yeah, so yeah, I got a bunch of stuff in the works or kind of recently completed. So as you mentioned earlier, I just put together a video called the Homebrew Games Summer Showcase 2023, which you can find on YouTube, and it's 140 homebrew games, 17 different consoles, about 30 minutes of nonstop gameplay. So it covers everything from NES, Super Nintendo, Genesis, Game Boy, Jaguar, Vectrex, Virtual Boy, like everything you can imagine. 3DO is in there. So it's like a really good like shotgun to the face of homebrew gaming if you're kind of interested in just diving in. And everything in there is either very recently released or coming soon. So it's a great way to kind of dive in on a few developers maybe and follow them along their journey as they release these games in the coming months and years. So in addition to that, I'm also working on a Genesis port of Witch and Whiz. So that again is done. It's been done for, I don't know, a year, maybe not quite a year, 6 months or so. And I'm just kind of trying to figure out the right way to release it. So I don't have a release date for that, but it'll be hopefully this year, 2023. I'm hoping to release it, but it's tied to some other stuff that I can't really talk about today, but so I'm kind of holding on to it for a bit, but it's done. It's pretty awesome. It's full graphical overhaul. It's like a 16-bit Genesis game, and it was done by I worked with a company called PSCD Games, who did they've done a whole bunch of stuff. Basically, Black Jewel Reborn Kickstarter, I think, was the biggest thing recently. But anyway, they basically did the port with me, and it's ready to go. It looks awesome. So keep an eye out for that. Working on From Below Pocket, which should be out in hopefully September 2023 this year. And along with that will come From Below for the NES being re-released in more of a mass market, non-limited way. So the plan is to do like a 1-month pre-order window where everybody who wants it can get it. No limits. You can order 100 copies. Please do. But after that month, it'll go away again for a while. In addition to that, Witch and Whiz for the NES, the contract with Limited Run ends this November. So they have like a 1 year basically exclusivity so that I don't just sell it right away and it's not really limited. So I don't know exactly when that's going to be out, but it should be, I don't know when I'll do that, but November is the earliest. So sometime after November, basically 1 year from when it shipped. And then, yes, I'm working on Super Sunny World, which is a new action platformer, heavily inspired from Super Mario Brothers for the NES, but with some modern twists. Bright, colorful, super fun game. I think it's the most fun game I've made yet, so I'm pretty excited to get it in people's hands. And then anything else? I'll probably think of something after, but I think that's about it. Yeah, let's make that the list. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I wanna thank you for this opportunity, of course, and I want to thank you for all the hard work you pour into the NES homebrew community. I really appreciate this. This was awesome. I really appreciate all your answers and everything we had to talk about. It is. I can't believe I'm asking you. I know I said this to Infidelity, but it feels the same way. Like I remember having questions when you released From Below, and they were in the back of my head, and I get to ask them to the person who created. You know, like I cannot ask for anything more satisfying for me. So I really appreciate it, and hope I'll see you around.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate having somebody to talk to about this stuff. It's my passion. So it's awesome. Thank you for the great questions.
Thank you so much. And all right, people, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. Hit the button below, and have a great day. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, everybody, for watching this, and we'll be seeing everybody around, hopefully. Have a good night.